Hello, everyone. Super excited to be here. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar that is about such an important topic, which is understanding social media and should we ban it for kids? Should we not? My name is Kaila Jarvis. I am the Global Trust and Safety Advisor at Keywords Studios. I work a lot with companies to understand how they can keep their online communities safe. And I am joined today by an expert panel of folks that work in online safety, work with families, work with children, and we're here to share some incredible information about today's topic. We're going to start with a round of introductions. Stephen, would you like to start us? And then we'll go around in a circle on my screen and I'll call you out after each one. So maybe, Stephen, you can tell us a little bit about yourself. If you want to include a fun fact about yourself, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks very much, and thanks for having me. Stephen Balkam, founder and CEO of the Family Online Safety Institute. We're a nonprofit based here in Washington, D.C. Our mission is to make the online world safer for kids and their families. So let's see. I don't know if it would be considered as fun or not, but I did live half my life in the UK, so I have two passports, and I did pass myself off as a Brit once. My accent was quite different when I was at school, and ended up playing Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet. So there you go.
Wonderful.
That was fun.
Love that.
Actually. I
That's a
enjoyed
good
it.
one. That's a good one. How about yourself, Zach?
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this, Kaila, Stephen. Great to be here. Great to see Laura and Jackie. I'm Zak Ringelstein. I'm founder and CEO of Zigazoo. We've been building safe social media since 2020, pioneers in doing so. We like to say we coined the term safe social media, although someone might argue with me. We talk a lot about how do we meet kids where they're at, right? Where they're in a reality that is inherently online and offline, and how do we give kids the appropriate tools that they need in order to succeed in all areas of their life. We know that social media can be a good thing, but also can be a very bad thing for kids and families. And so we're trying to create a world where kids can have only the good of it, only the best of it. And former educator, spent 5 years teaching elementary school, founder of another company called UClass that we sold. Work a lot at the intersection of policy and technology, and really excited about being here. One fun fact about me is that I love country music and that I write music. I've probably written like a couple hundred songs in my life, and that's like sort of a passion and side hobby. So you might catch me, at certain times, like 11 p.m. sitting down with a guitar after the kids are asleep.
Love that. Thank you, Zach. And Jacqueline.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be here with everyone. I'm Jacqueline Nesi. I am a clinical psychologist and an assistant professor at Brown University in the Department of Psychiatry. I study the role of social media and other technologies in young people's well-being, mental health, and how parents can help. And I also write a newsletter called Technosapiens, all about the science behind parenting and technology and psychology. And my other role is as the co-founder of Tech Without Stress, which offers online courses for parents on navigating technology. A fun fact about me, I don't know if this is fun, but my favorite food is everything bagels.
Can resonate with that.
Who doesn't love an everything bagel?
Thank you. And Laura.
Awesome. It's so good to be here with everyone. I'm Laura Tierney, the founder and CEO here at the Social Institute, and we are on a mission to partner with schools, supporting three important groups: students, families, and educators, all on the same team around positive use of technology, from AI to social media and beyond. And I love just locking arms with students to think about what they're navigating and the latest timely trends and challenges and more that they're facing, and to make sure that they have coaches in their lives on how to make those positive choices. And I felt like I lived the problem myself. I got a phone when I was 13 years old, and just feel like as we're putting these devices in students' hands, it's always good to have a playbook of positive moves that they could be making. And speaking of playbook, like once a student athlete, I feel like always an athlete. And I grew up playing a lot of sports. I represented Team USA for some time, and played in field hockey in college. And I just love that intersection of character, technology, and those skills that I felt like I learned on and off the field, and try to bring that to our work. And a fun fact about me, I have never learned how to whistle. And so when I tell people, especially students, that there's a reaction of kind of like whistling back at me, maybe as if I'm going to learn how to whistle in real time, but someday it'll happen.
I had to hold myself back. I was ready to whistle as soon as you said that.
Right.
There's got to be a study in there somewhere about that.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, all of you. I feel like I escaped my own question, so I will share a quick fun fact as well. There was a time when I worked in outdoor recreation and tourism, and I was both a park ranger on top of a mountain and a scuba dive master under the sea. And now I work in tech and online safety. So you never know how your life is going to pivot. So for today, and for our attendees and audience members, after those round of introductions, I'm sure you can recognize how knowledgeable our panel is. We're here, of course, to talk about if we believe social media can be part of a healthy childhood. And I feel we have folks that are going to answer on both sides of that. Some key data points that I did in terms of research prior to was that nearly 25% of children age 5 to 7 own a smartphone, and 38% of that age group are on social media. That was a shocker for me. Youth mental health in the US is on the decline. There was a 20% increase in emergency department visits for children for mental distress, and self-injury and self-harm rising by 50%. However, on the flip side of that, 72% of teens agree that social media serves as an effective learning tool, particularly around mindfulness and meditation. And it facilitates connections among young people, particularly those that might be marginalized or have a hard time talking with folks and sharing with folks around their immediate environment about things that might be challenging to them. So we'll open up the panels to talk about, should social media be accepted or banned for children under the age of 13? And we'll go in a reverse order this time. So Laura, maybe you can start us off.
Yeah, definitely a popular question among families. And I believe that there's no magic age, but rather every family has different values, and children have different upbringings. But it's really what I do believe is that it's best to ease your child into technology and social media over time, so they're building that mental muscle even from that early age of 2 years old or 3 years old, with how they're interacting with technology, and they could build that responsibility over time. One phrase that we like to use with families is like, think of it as like rookie, varsity, and pro, and that the platforms that you align a child with in those different stages, like rookie versus varsity versus pro, like unlock different freedoms and responsibilities. And what's very important is you don't want your child skipping into varsity and bypassing rookie. So you want to find those kind of rookie stages that help them think about choices in a developmentally appropriate way.
Absolutely. And I love the tie back to sports and your background when you were younger. So that was great. Thank you. Jacqueline, how about yourself?
Yeah, I agree with Laura in that I think that there is no one, magic age when kids are suddenly ready to be on social media. For this question, I think it depends on how we're defining social media, right? Like what is considered under that umbrella of social media? Because I think that, the popular platforms that are out there right now, the main ones, I do think that the way they're designed at the moment is probably not safe for many kids under the age of 13. But that doesn't mean that there couldn't be social media platforms or other types of digital tools that would be safe for kids under 13, right? Like I think that with the right protections in place, there's nothing that's necessarily problematic about a child under the age of 13 spending some time chatting with friends online or looking at content that's appropriate for them or that kind of thing. So I do think it actually depends on probably what we're considering to be social media.
Absolutely. And you bring up some very valid points, some of which we'll dive in a little bit deeper to further down into the conversation. Zach, how about yourself?
Yeah, I would actually argue that not just the mainstream platforms aren't safe for under 13. I think we're realizing that the mainstream platforms aren't safe for the mental health and wellness of any human being. And so I think, it's a very, very complex conversation. And the conversation really deals with, something that in the history of mankind is extremely new, which is that we have basically access to this entire online world and ecosystem, in our pockets, and increasingly so. And obviously can't necessarily blame the regulators or our governments, but the governments haven't been able to move fast enough to really serve the needs and well-being of people. When it comes to social media, kids socialize. I used AIM how many have used AIM, right? Millennial tool, right? I actually work very closely with the former CEO of AOL. And when we think about kids and like as they're evolving, this generation is comfortable with AI. They're comfortable with ChatGPT. They're comfortable in social media. They're comfortable in gaming. And I don't think that keeping them all the way from it is the right answer. However, to I think Jackie and Laura's points, kids do need safeguards, right? There's a reason why we have preschools and elementary schools and middle schools, and all of those spaces, physically, socially and emotionally, as well as in terms of academics, they do different things for different kids. Even the playgrounds and the play spaces are different, and they're meeting the developmental needs of kids where they're at. And so I think it's really important that we think a lot about that. The last thing I'll say, because I could spend an hour just answering that one question, is I think there's a big mistake that's happened since COVID, and I think we're finally sort of as a society correcting for this. Is I felt like until 2019-20, there was just a general recognition among parents, among school leaders, among experts, that there is a concept of too much screen time. And it seemed that with COVID and the lockdowns, et cetera, that suddenly we just decided, no, there actually isn't too much screen time. So I don't know if this is all a social media thing or a social media problem as much as it is like also just too much technology problem and an over-reliance on our phones, tablets, computers for something that we actually do need from the outside world. So I'll stop there again, because I could spend 3 hours talking about it.
It's a really interesting point to call out about COVID. I have 2 teenagers, and one came up through middle school during COVID. And depending on the personality of the kids, he loved learning online. He could have spent his entire day in his room between school and social gaming. And then my younger one, learning online and spending that much time, I could see the detrimental effects for her. So I think to the points all three of you have made so far, there's not a magic age. I think it very much depends on the individual child and family, and then we could broaden that out to be culture as well. So very interesting point. Thank you, Zach. And Stephen, how about yourself?
Well, I want to just take a step back. And I was around in 95 with the emergence of what we called the World Wide Web. And,
Yes.
Hearings were held on Capitol Hill and trying to get to the bottom of this new phenomenon. And then fast forward to 2005 and the emergence of Web 2.0 and social media. And, kids creating the content we used to try to keep them away from and doing it on these magical devices that allowed them not to be tethered to the living room where we told parents to put the internet, to put their computer. And now 2025, we have the explosion of Gen AI. And in each case, none of those three developments, none of those three new platforms were created with kids in mind. Mm-hmm. They were basically built for us. And actually, to be honest, because we live in a capitalist society, they were built for profit. And how do you get profit? You get users and you get engagement. The numbers of users, and that graph was the number one graph in the CEO's offices all through Silicon Valley. And the second one was engagement, number of hours on. So the idea of a safe environment, a trusted environment, was kind of left for those guys over there in the corner to take the trash out. We didn't really think about that until the trash overflowed the C-suite, or Congress came calling and said, we're going to shut you down or fine you unless you do. Ironically, well, maybe not ironically, the Europeans have probably been the world leaders in regulation, while we've been the world leaders in innovation. And I think we've got to figure out a way to get that balance right, particularly in this country. Final thing I'll say, talking about the pandemic, and we just did a research study on digital well-being of kids last year. For many, many kids, the online environment saved their sanity through the pandemic. It also saved a lot of adults' sanity too, for that matter. The ability for the connection was huge. We had no idea how much we needed that. But as we're coming out of it, we're all struggling, adults as well as kids, with containing the usage of our devices to a way that, and who knows what is normal anymore, but is one that actually promotes well-being rather than takes it away.
Really great thoughts there, Stephen. And I like your comparison of sort of the three main tipping points, as it were, when it comes to going online. I was also around during the World Wide Web and the lovely sounds of dial-up that a lot of folks will never have the pleasure of hearing. And then 2005 and 25, so super relevant. But you also brought in some positive sides of it as well. And I think that's what I'm very excited about as we dive into this conversation. I think we'll break it down for our audience members, each area of expertise for our panelists. And Zach, I'm going to start with you. And please, panelists, jump in and share your thoughts. We won't let Zach talk the whole time because we know he is so passionate about this that it's hard, but that's my job. I'll help keep us all on track. So Zach, when we talk about motives and responsibility of social media, and Stephen talked a little bit about this already. So why do you think the tech industry opened social media platforms to children? And who holds the primary responsibility for safety? Is it the parents? Is it the platforms? Is it the regulators? Or perhaps a combination?
Really, really good and hard questions that you're asking. I think number one, Stephen said it exactly right, which is that what motivates CEOs in a capitalistic society, it is engagement at all costs, right? And until someone basically clamps down on anything, there's no incentive for the CEO of any company to I would say actually, so there's actually two things. One is regulation. Two is is blowback, public blowback. Those are the two things that I think at the end of the day can sometimes help CEOs make other decisions. But to Stephen's point, they're looking at their MAU graph, they're looking at their DAU graph. MAU is monthly active users, DAU daily active users. If you get really, really into it, you can do your DAU wow and your wow mao, which is basically weekly active users over monthly active users. Then you're looking at how many video views you're getting, how many clicks, how many likes, all of your engagement metrics. This is how social media companies are judged by their investors. At the end of the day, this all leads to more advertising. It leads to more clicks, and it leads to more money and more profits. At the end of the day, everything is in service to this. And so I think when you look at the why they won't, why like, let's just use, the CEO of Meta as an example. Why doesn't Mark Zuckerberg, think, oh, maybe we shouldn't put 7-year-olds on? Because there was no reason not to. Even though COPPA was in place since 1998, there was no teeth around COPPA. No one knew how to or had the sort of stomach at that point to go ahead and use government agencies to clamp down. And so, you just keep building and building and building. And a lot of people compare social media now to gambling, right? Compare it to a casino environment. And I think it's a fair comparison, because if you look at the areas of your brain, I love Jackie's point of view on this, but you look at the areas of the brain that light up, as a result of getting a like, or getting a comment or getting a follow. I think we're living in an age where we're sort of getting those to a point where arguably it can lead to significant addictions. And so, how do we deal with this? I think we as a society need to decide where the onus lies. I mean, I live and work and think in the tech industry for kids. So if you came into my household with our 3 boys, you'll find that they have probably some of the strictest parents when it comes to their online life. Our kids are on Zigazoo. Our kids are watching television. We want them to have an opportunity to connect, to learn AI, and to be fluent. But at the same time, we actually believe that developmentally, it's more important for them to have a really rich offline world and to use their online world as a supplement. I think we also live in America, and in America, parents oftentimes need 2 household incomes in order to survive. And we need to make sure that we are dealing with this not just in putting the entire onus on parents, because I think that requires a lot. It requires you to understand all the science behind it, and then come to a decision, and then, basically go against the grain in your community at this point. Say, my kids aren't on these games when all their kids are on there. I mean, that's honestly an unfair expectation. And so I think that we need to, at this point, and this is my deep-seated belief, is it has to be regulated. And I think these regulations need to come. They need to come fast. I think they are coming, and I think they are coming fast. But as I'm sure we'll talk about on this panel, a lot of these regulations regulate surgically and in a way, I think, that meets the needs and developmental needs of families and kids. So I think at the end of the day, my belief at this point is that it's unfair to put this on parents, but if parents can and will be able to restrict their kids will be better off. But at the end of the day, we need to do this, much like the food industry. We need to regulate from a government perspective, and I think that regulation, it would be best if the U.S. leads federally, because going on a state-by-state basis is really, really challenging.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it there.
Those are really great points, Zach, and I'll give an opportunity for the other panelists to jump in. Absolutely. Regulations, platforms, parents or caregivers. I think combination, absolutely. I think one key point, and we touched on it in introductions, is working in the field as we do. We're very aware of some of the darker patterns of technology that companies do. So even Zak, just you saying, and Stephen as well, like from a capitalistic point of view, companies are attractive, or their products are attractive to children because they made them that way to get engagement and to get more users on their platform. But when you're aware of these patterns and you're aware of this, then you can better educate your children. So I have an example of my youngest child when she first went onto TikTok, and they have their streaks, and you have to get it every single day. And we were going away out into the world where we were offline, completely cut off from Wi-Fi and cellular, which was wonderful. But the fear and the panic from such a young person of not being able to keep up the streaks, I recognized what was happening and was able to calm her down and say, this is what's happening, and these are what these companies do. They want you to feel this way so that you continue every day to go on. And I think she got the concept, but I had that knowledge. And so for parents that don't have that knowledge, that's where I feel like, oh my goodness, education for the parents is such an important piece of this. Analysts, Stephen, Laura, Jacqueline, anything you want to add to that, to what Zak was saying?
The Tamagotchi, anyone from the 90s? Yeah, exactly. So we had to run home several times to make sure that my daughter's creature didn't die. So it's
fair.
Being built in since the beginning of electronics. Just wanted to, that's my only little comment.
Jackie, I'd be curious what your thoughts are around what the brain is doing when kids are using social media.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I won't speak too strongly on this, but I do actually think that the brain science is still pretty far off from being able to tell us a whole lot about the connection between social media use and brain development. I think that, it is true that areas of the brain light up when we have rewarding experiences, whether that's, gambling, social media use, or whether it's spending time with friends and family, right? Like those are all rewarding things. And so, and it's true that we see those kinds of patterns in the brain. I think that when it comes to the concept of addiction, that's obviously a pretty complicated issue. And a lot of time, and I wouldn't say that we're quite at the point where, we would say that the way the brain is operating in social media use is the same as the way it is operating with addiction to a substance like alcohol or drugs. All that said, though, I almost have come to the point where I feel like it doesn't matter very much. Like in some ways, I think we really want to have a brain-based explanation for some of the patterns that we see in how people are using social media, because it feels concrete or it feels like scientific, but I do think that at the end of the day, we can see a lot of the problems with social media, and we can see with our own eyes just what is happening, the content kids are being exposed to, the cases where they're having a really hard time putting it down and spending too much time, and it's getting in the way of other activities and things that are important for their mental health. And so for me, increasingly, I'm feeling like, that almost should be enough. Like, I almost feel like we don't need some kind of proof from the brain to say that there's a problem here. Like, I think that, we can come to that conclusion on our own in some cases.
It was a great segue, Zak, in terms of Jacqueline and her area of expertise. I'd be curious to know from the panel, and we'll start with you, Jacqueline, what do you see as the benefits of younger children using social media?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, when you say younger children, do you mean
like under 13?
Under 13? So I think, yeah, I mean, this comes back to the original question of like, what do we mean when we say social media, and what is covered under that umbrella. In general, though, I do think that there are benefits to kids connecting, whether that's happening online or through text message or through some sort of platform that's more carefully moderated or monitored. I think that when it comes to the research on this, most of the research we have is among teens, so over the age of 13. And in that group, we see certainly benefits in terms of social connection. We know that I think it's 70-something% of teens, according to the recent Pew data, say that social media is helping them to feel more connected to their friends. So that's a key benefit. I think there are benefits in terms of identity formation and exploration, and as well as just generally exploring interests. I think that learning and discovering, I also think are benefits to maybe not social media in particular, but to having access to so much of what the internet has to offer.
Absolutely. Any other panelists want to chime in on that one?
I'm a big believer in instead of solely like scaring and restricting, how do we empower and equip students? And there are so many positives about technology. And Jackie's point, like, what is social? I mean, it could be FaceTiming, like, requires social skills, like texting requires social skills. It's not your go-to mainstream everyday social platforms that we think about that are the only kind of options out there for being social through technology. And I feel like for every negative, there's a positive, and those students, like, they know the positives so well. The kids are familiar with them. And I think for whether you are in ed tech or you are a parent navigating the space, I'm a big believer in CTC, control the controllable. And there's so many things that we can't control about technology, and we might not be able to control legislation, but you can control education and how you're either educating your child or certainly a big believer in how schools are educating students, and thinking of this as kind of like the new driver's ed. But rather than solely just focusing on the kind of scare and restrict approach, I think that empowering and equipping is as, if not more important, with all those positives that come with technology.
Well, I think a lot about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You have your just basic physiological needs. You have your need for safety next, and then the third one is love and belonging, right? After you have you're sleeping and you're eating and you're safe, the next thing you need as a human is to love and belong. And the reason why we started Zigazoo was because during the pandemic, there was no way for kids to connect socially. So how do we create a safe place to give them literally one of the building blocks of like who they are as kids? Kids are social. Like, one thing that is like the basis of my elementary school classroom, and to be honest, any good elementary school classroom, is like, it should be a social learning environment. Kids are motivated socially because they are social beings. They don't socialize in the exact same way as adults do, but increasingly they do. I mean, as they get to 8, 10, 12, they have social needs. And if you look at what incentivizes kids to want to learn, it's usually social. That's why collaborative projects where they end up working alongside others, learning from others, and then presenting their skills and their product to others is actually the most effective. What I think is like really important to say about this, though, is that environment in a school and your home should be safe, and it should come along with productive outcomes. And so There's a recent study, I think it's a CNN study, that showed that like 32% of kids in 2022 said that social media was like bad for them. And now like it's like 50%, I think it's 48% is the number. That's a pretty marked jump. And I think kids are recognizing it, like themselves. Teenagers and kids know that this is a problem. I think that this is, requiring of a large solution. To Laura's point, kids are social. It's not a bad thing. They are social. They live partially online. That is not a bad thing. However, how do we create environments that keep kids safe and even make themselves feel safe? If they're reporting, half of them are reporting that they don't feel safe, or that they know this isn't good for them, what can we do to collaborate with them to make them feel good about this experience?
A really great question, Zach. And Stephen, I wonder if with your expertise, you can provide some insights on that. What ethical responsibilities do platforms or companies have to prioritize the well-being of children?
Yeah, this is a fascinating conversation. Before I answer that one, it's just been occurring to me that, and often in the US, we talk a lot about parental rights, the rights of parents to protect their kids, and quite right too. We all have the right to do so. But in Europe, there's a very strong movement about kids' rights. And in fact, there's an organization called Five Rights by Baroness Beeben Kidron, who was very, very influential in passing the age-appropriate design code in the UK, bringing it to California, bringing it to Maryland, and so on. But interestingly enough, she starts by saying kids have a right for safety and privacy online. Absolutely, they have a right to feel that way. But they also have a right to access content and to access each other and to express themselves. And often we find, and particularly when we work in certain states, shall we say, in this country, there is a codification of parental rights into law with absolutely no acknowledgement that kids have their own rights. It's sort of like from 0 to 18, you have nothing. Sorry, kids. And then at 18, you have everything. And that's, well, in contrast, the Europeans see it as a gradual curve. And just want to state that we feel the same way. All right, so in that context, absolutely, the platforms have an ethical responsibility to create that safety. Even though as we acknowledged at the beginning, that the internet, social media, Gen AI was not created with kids in mind. So what we're doing is we're trying to retrofit much of our main platforms. Or in the case of Zigazoo and Roblox and some others, there are folks coming along and saying, we're starting this from scratch. We're doing this from the ground up so that we have kids in mind all the way through. And we're seeing more of that, and that's incredibly encouraging. But the vast majority of spaces out there are in, shall we say, considering kids as mini adults rather than very, very different developmentally, emotionally, intelligent, all the rest of the Lees, not the same as little adults. But we're not still, after all of these years, not designing it for them or pretending that they're not there. We have a rule that says they're not allowed and therefore they're not there. And Zach, your talking to Senator Markey about COPPA 2.0 is very timely. COPPA, of course, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, is probably one of the most foundational pieces of legislation from the 90s online. But ironically, it's not a safety law. It's around privacy and marketing to kids. We have very, very few safety rules and regulations. Again, the Europeans are leading the way, and in many cases, US companies are having to do their best to adhere to what's going on in Europe and importing some of that thinking and designing into their US-based platforms. I don't even know if I answered your question, Kaila, sorry.
You did. Do they have an ethical responsibility to prioritize well-being? And I think ethical responsibility can often depend on the lens in which you're looking through. And as we talked a lot at the beginning of this conversation, capitalism and for-profit often clouds that lens.
Yeah.
It's easy to say under the rug, as you mentioned, we don't have children on our platform. You have to be over 13 to access our platform. And coming again from a family with 2 teenagers, they learned very quickly what age they needed to be able to get past that age gate. And so regulations have become more strict to circumvent that, which is now you have to have parental controls and parental assurance. And if the companies aren't ethically going to create responsibly for young children, then that's where regulators, Zak, you touched on it quite a bit, where regulation comes in to say, okay, if you're not going to do it, then we're going to do it for you, and we're going to force you to do it. Anyone else, Jackie, Laura, Zak, around ethical development of products for children?
I'll just say 1 or 2 things. I think that there aren't a lot of incentives to do so. It would be great to see regulations that create incentives and even for-profit incentives. There are really interesting private sector incentives that have been created historically. Hadn't really thought about that until this call, but like there probably are cool, innovative things that can be done to prioritize this. What I am starting to see, we're thrilled about it, is that when we started Zigazoo as safe social media, I remember a bunch of people saying to me, "Why?" Like, doesn't make like this was 5 years ago, and people were just like, "Why?" Like, people hadn't really gotten to the place where we were still living in this era where social media helped create the Arab Spring. Like, there's all these positives to social media. And believe it or not, that has changed like drastically since we started the company. So we're starting to see people say, oh, actually, there is a market. Just like if I compare social media to the food movement or to food, if I compare social media to food, you see like in 1990, when I was a young kid, there was no such thing as a real food movement. I mean, Trader Joe's existed. Whole Foods, I think, was just coming around. But then who would have guessed that then Amazon would buy Whole Foods, right? Or that, everyone would be thinking and talking about how to basically eat healthy, right? That wasn't a thing. And so I think we're now reaching that sort of tipping point with social media. And with that, there comes a market opportunity. By the way, Zigazoo is a for-profit company. I think we talked a lot about profit motives, et cetera. I always think there's a healthy balance. I always say capitalism with a conscience. Like, capitalism isn't a bad thing. It helps, to Stephen's point, us create the greatest innovations known to mankind. At the same time, we do need a conscience, right? We can't knock our own people down in the name of innovation. And so how do we think about market incentives, which I think are starting to develop around safety by design, wellness by design? The idea is that you start with, who am I serving, and how do we actually think about their developmental needs, the ethics around this before we start building, as opposed to retrofitting, as Stephen said.
It's a really great point. And the companies that I work with, they run the gamut in terms of safe social media practices and ethical development. And to your point, I see a trend, and it's a positive trend, and it warms my heart and gives me hope that there are companies that are very aware and very conscious and taking the steps necessary to provide safe environments, not just for children, but for all of their user base, including adults. And now they're starting to stand out, and they're standing out for the right reasons. They're standing out because they're not in the news for a terrible PR, or they're not in the news because of the fines they've received for regulations. They might not actually be in the news right now, but in working with them, I think they will become examples of how you can still make a profit. You can have an ethically designed product, and you can still do what you know to be right for your community and for your players and for your users. So when I talk to these companies, I use them as the milestone to say, you're doing a great job. Thank you. Kudos to you. And then how can we promote companies like Zigazoo as an example that are doing this so that we can bring that awareness to the public that there are alternatives? Maybe that's a good question, Laura, that I can shift it over to you. Do you think there's a middle path? We talked a little bit about banning outright. We talked about acceptance. So for companies and for online members and community members, do you think there's a middle path between acceptance and banning outright? Do you think there are tools that companies can put us into place that move us towards wellness?
Absolutely. I feel like there needs to be a middle ground because technology isn't going away anytime soon. And a concept that I remember brainstorming with students a while back is, even if you take the concept of like the basic food pyramid and those different levels and how there's different kinds of food that we can eat, from like your healthy vegetables to like having tons of Swedish fish at the end of the day, maybe not the best choices for you. Well, screen time can exist. There could also be a screen time kind of pyramid concept where there is screen time where you can learn from role models out there. You can collaborate with people. You can build creativity on your own. And I remember being a teenager and loving what I could do by making movies, through technology. And then as you go further up the pyramid, well, at the very top, you get to going down to that like YouTube wormhole or TikTok wormhole, and you're not building as many skills. And it's beyond the point of just like relaxing and zoning out on the couch at the end of a long kind of school day. And if we think that if we truly believe not all screen time is created equal, how do we, level up the healthy kind of screen time in our life and then really build barriers, good barriers around those wormholes kind of at the top? And you're seeing some mainstream companies do that, whether it's like built-in time limits or you get some type of push notification. And families might argue, well, listen, that's not enough because my child is like well into that wormhole. That notification is not pulling them out anytime soon. So I do think to help with finding those healthy designs and the healthy standards, involving students and kids in the conversation. And to Stephen's point, like one of the rights that they should have is they should have a seat at the table to talk about the standards that their classroom might be following, that their family might be following. How often are companies actually meeting with students and involving them in the conscious design of their products? I remember an adult when because we have a software, educational software. I remember an adult being like, well, why don't you throw points in there? Students, like they love points. Like they'll just kind of eat that up. And then when we ran that idea by students, the students were like, not another thing that like gives us points. Like we just want to like not have points, for once in our life. And that insight is so pure, and not saying points are good or bad, but I think it all ties back to like, what is the ultimate outcome at the end of the day? It's just like an allowance isn't bad. An allowance can be an amazing motivator to helping a child learn responsibility, but how it's designed in their everyday life is so important. So just like, student voice for the win all day, every day, and their ideas. I loved what you said, Stephen, about like those, just the rights that they have, because they are the voice that needs to be in this conversation, and they have brilliant ideas. We're as much kind of learning from them every day with how authentic kind of they are. So I do think that's helps you get at that middle ground, is involving student voice in your family standards agreement, in your classroom agreement, if you're a teacher at school, because they will bring many thoughtful, positive ideas to the table.
Can I just speak to one pitfall of rights? Because I'm a huge believer in kid voices, students at the table, et cetera and so forth. But I'm hearing more and more the industry using this as their kind of like weapon of choice to kind of not get certain regulations passed. And I just want to say it because I'm hearing it all the time in meetings now with companies that don't have kids' best interests at heart. They're like, but kids want it. And I'm like, yeah, but kids also would eat ice cream all day if they could. You know what I mean? It's like, but kids want it. And I'm like, yeah, have you ever seen Lord of the Flies? Like, have you ever read that book? Like, you know what I mean? I think that like there is, there are kids should have rights and kids should absolutely be at the table, but kids also aren't like, they need guidance. Like every child I've ever known needs guidance. They're not naturally going to like be incentivized to making the right decisions. So I think we just have to be a little careful with this, because I am hearing it sort of like used and weaponized to a negative end. It's like, yes, kids do have a First Amendment right, but like, should they be able to say and do anything at any time? No, right? And in my experience, kids need structure, they need guidance, they need mentoring, they need great coaching, they need help with habit formation and discipline in order to become the wonderful people that they can be. So I just want to just say that, because I don't feel like people talk enough about that when they talk about student and kid rights.
Yeah, I mean, I think the analogy I will sometimes give is like, I don't know about you guys, but when I was 13 years old, growing up in small town Pennsylvania, there wasn't much to do on a Friday night. And so when Friday came along, you went to the mall because all your friends were there, and you didn't like want to purchase anything. You just showed up at that mall because all your friends were there. And I think about some of those mainstream apps, like they're showing up because their friends are there and they may not have had a other healthy alternative to go to. There are other healthy alternatives out there, but that pull away from the mainstream mall that some of your other peers might be at is a real pull. And so again, like control the controllable. I think we got to control the family standards that we have, the limits that we set, what apps a child is or isn't allowed to go on kind of for your own family that align with your values. Because otherwise, yeah, you don't get to run into the candy store and get anything you want and you walk out with a 5-pound bag of candy. There are restraints and limits to like nurturing a healthy, confident, capable child.
Absolutely. And I think, when you mentioned the points system, and Zach, I hear you on that. And I've heard it in the companies that I talk to and that I work with as well. I've heard it in the media. And I think part of it is that maybe they're panicking a little bit because they know regulatory compliance is becoming mandatory across the board. I also feel that there is a movement. So having been in the space, and I'm speaking now more about the video game space, which is where my expertise is, but in the 10 years that I've been in this space, I have seen a shift, and I've seen a shift from the company side, but I think more reassuring is I've seen a shift from the community side, from the player side. And I think this generation, I have a couple of young people that I know that are no longer teenagers, they're young adults, and they have the self-awareness to look back and say, ooh, I spent a lot of time just ingesting content, not even playing games where you have to put thought into it and you have to have skill to do it and you're communicating with your friends, but just passively ingesting content. But now they have a standard of expectation when they go online to different platforms or when they go into different online environments, that they're craving and looking for those places that contribute positively to themselves. We're talking about 19 and 20-year-olds, so they've just shifted out. And I think there's a real opportunity for industry to think about that and to be, hey, we've got these kids that are coming up now that are young. Maybe they're 5 to 7, maybe they're 9 to 11, maybe they're 13 to 16, but they have way more awareness about social pitfalls and social media and healthy habits than the generation before them. And so their expectations on industry are going to continue to evolve. And I think that's changing the marketplace. We have 15 minutes until the hard stop. I'd like to thank all our panelists for their contributions. It's been an amazing conversation, very educational, and hopefully for our audience, very insightful. I'd like us to think about wrapping up and really having an opportunity to close out with a thought from yourself, from your area of expertise, from your company, of what is your sort of final hope, your insight? If you could wave that magic wand, what would you want to see to help shape a healthier digital childhood? It can be on industry, it can be on parents, it can be on regulators, it can be on everybody. Jackie, I think we'll start with you this time. I'm trying to give everybody the opportunity to speak first, and then I'll call you individually to close out.
Great. Yeah, I think one thing I would love to see is just increased efforts toward media literacy. So really teaching kids about the digital tools that they're using, how they work, what the incentives are behind them, and how to use them in healthier and safer ways. I think this is becoming even more relevant now with generative AI. We're going to see obviously a lot of shifts in how things work and with that. And I think that kids are really going to need the education around how these tools work and how to use them in safer ways. So that would be, I think that would be the main thing that I would like to see.
It's really important and relevant. I sit on a working group through NYU Stern, and it's around video game ratings because they are so vastly different across the globe. But what we're discussing is exactly that, the education piece, like what should be included in ratings. Right now, it's very content focused, like will you see graphic violence and gore and so on and so forth. But what about in ads, in-app ads? Are they appropriate to the age of the product? What about dark patterns? Do we need to call those out, dark patterns such as the addiction that we're talking about online? So I think that education piece that you say is absolutely relevant and so important.
Yeah, and I think that, right now, a lot of when we talk to kids about these technologies, a lot of the conversation is very fear-based and very much like, here's all the things that are bad, here's all the risks, and here's why it's bad for your mental health and all these things. And obviously we really want kids to be aware of the risks. And I also think we need to include in those conversations tools for them to use these things in safer and healthier ways. It can't just be about here's all the problems and don't use them, right? Like we have to actually teach them how.
Absolutely. A skill, like some of the happiest sounds I hear coming from my daughter when she's in the living room or in her bedroom, is doing a silly TikTok dance and with her friends, and they're laughing and they're creating, and those are really positive moments as well. Zach, how about for yourself?
Sure. I think when we contemplate should social media be banned or not, I think that I just want to say it. I think there are parts of social media that should be banned. I think, especially for certain age groups. And I think we should acknowledge that there is a problem, that if 50% of kids say there's a problem, there's probably a problem, right? And I think, we as a society need to figure this out. I'm very excited to see consensus starting to form around certain ideas. I'm not sure if the industry is listening. I'm not sure if our government yet is set up to pass anything that would address the problem directly. But I do think that we are coming to consensus that kids probably shouldn't have smartphones, in school all day. I mean, it turns out that tons and tons of the best institutions in the country are banning this. We would never have thought so a few years ago, right? And so I am really hopeful that there are changes When it comes to Zigazoo, I do want to mention that there are some things that we do that I think if they were implemented across the board would be really powerful, and would protect a lot of kids and their innocence and honestly their wellness long term. I'm just going to name a few of them. One is verifying kids with age assurance technology, moderating all media just to ensure that at least for kids, you're not hearing swearing and content that is violent or graphic. That we are thinking a lot about the models that encourage activity and constructive behaviors, that we are giving kids opportunities to own their community agreements. So giving them the right to agree to something and then upholding that together as a community, taking a pledge. We also think that there are opportunities to empower kids as community leaders in their tools to support the positive and safe tone of the platform. And then to Jackie's point, we have the opportunity, I think, to teach everybody, right? To teach both through instruction in schools, as well as we talk a lot about learning by doing. Zigazoo is all about learning by doing. The kids who are on Zigazoo are now ambassadors in the real world as teenagers and then as adults eventually, because they've been doing safer social media, and they now say to other people, oh, why would you do that? Why would you be a bully online? Because they've been learning about that because of their actions on Zigazoo, and because of the little world, the big world now, I guess, that we've created on the platform. I also think there's a lot of good questions around whether or not at this point with the technologies that exist, DMing should exist on platforms, and also about ways that we can think about consumption and the habits around consumption. So my point is that I think we are coming to a consensus. I think it's taking longer than I'd like to see it, but I think that consensus is good. I think regulations are following in Europe and on the state level. And I think that we're going to start to see some major federal rules around this. And I think that market-driven approaches like Zigazoo and others are going to end up being the solution. Really excited about the future here. And I think that just like we've been able to solve, other major problems, this is a problem that is worth solving and will be solved. That by the time I have grandkids, that this will be sort of like, oh, hey, maybe there is something you can use if you want to, but now you can go to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's, right? And you can actually, like, it's actually mainstreamed, and we're looking forward as a society to other more exciting and hopeful things.
For sure, and Stephen, in the FOSI world and being so involved with regulation over the years and seeing the changes, as you've said. Any comments on what Zach said or closing remarks as well?
Yeah, so I want to actually, a year ago, a book landed from outer space called The Anxious Generation, and it caused a sensation. I mean, neighbors on the street would stop me and ask me if I'd read the book. It's been a long time since someone had done that. And while I have a lot of sympathy for what Jonathan Haidt was writing, particularly around unstructured time for kids, outdoor, all that stuff, totally agree. Unfortunately, it's also led to some rash and rather hurried legislation. Australia is a good example. And so we ended up taking a position where we're not for blanket bans, but we are for thoughtful restrictions. And those restrictions at the school district level, the school level, the family level, that also involve kids too, in the debate and in the discussion. We have to have some restrictions on the time you're having on screen. Let's work together on this. So for me, that's number one. Number two, I guess the show, the TV show Adolescence has come around, also dropped from outer space, and that's sort of taken up the sort of main theme of discussion now about our kids, about social media and parenting. And if you haven't seen it already, there's no spoilers here, but there is a point in the second episode where the detective, who also has a son in the school where a murder has taken place of a schoolgirl, actually has to stop his dad and say, Dad, you're not getting it. This is what's going on online. And there's just this amazing intergenerational teachable moment that the son seizes. And so we as parents have to be alive to those moments. And I guess the last thing I'd say is kids do what we do, not what we tell them to do. And, you know, the number one complaint that I get from kids when I work in schools is I can't get my mom's attention. She's always on Facebook. Dad's just checking his email at the dining room table. And we have got to put our screens down and hug our kids and give them eye contact and give them our precious time and attention and ask to see where they're going online. And my God, they'll love you for it. So I think I'll just leave it at that.
Wonderful, wonderful statements, Stephen. And I saw you nodding along, Laura. So we'll give you your opportunity.
Man,
right?
that was
I agree.
preach. I could hear that all day. I love that. I mean, students, kids, they can't be what they can't see. We help set the standard. And as always, Stephen, that's a wonderful reminder of that. And I appreciate all the points that that you all made. I mean, I also envision a world where, again, with legislation comes education, and imagine what it could look like in the most social setting possible, which is schools, to be teaching media literacy, AI literacy, all things digital literacy, because it's so social in that school setting. And what I find that the most innovative school communities are doing is they are weaving this into health or social studies. They are not just tacking it on into like homeroom or advisory or something like that can fall by the wayside. And so, I mean, yeah, education for the win. And it results in huddling, not helicoptering, and actually huddling with students about what are those limits that we should set, what are those standards that we should live by with technology, because it's not going away anytime soon. And I think that's a really good thing, because it can be a force for good in our lives. So thank goodness it's not going away, but we can control what we can control about it.
Absolutely. Panelists, thank you so much. You each brought such an interesting perspective. You shared your knowledge and your experience with us. Audience, I hope you found it interesting, insightful. Hopefully you got some key takeaways as well that you'll be able to take forward with you in your lives. Zigazoo, thank you so much for hosting. Zak, Stephen, Jacqueline, Laura, really appreciate your time. Wish you all the best in your day to come, and look forward to the opportunity to speak with you all again. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job.
Great seeing everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It means a lot. And I really like good dialogue like that, by the way. I feel like we touched on a lot of really, really wonderful points. And I feel like I learned something. I'm a big believer in just like being able to go for it. And I feel like we had some really, really wonderful discussion. So I just thank you